Welcome back to the Bitcoin Layer. I'm Nick Bhatia. Today we welcome back Noelyne Sumba. She is our correspondent in Africa, giving us continual updates on adoption in the continent. Noelyne, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It's always a pleasure to be on the Bitcoin layer.
Okay, Noelyne, talk to us about Bitcoin adoption. The situation is obviously very different in countries from Nigeria to South Africa to Kenya to Ghana to Egypt. We have different economies, different regimes, different monetary policy regimes, different import export laws. Freedom of transactions are different in every country. What I'm interested in, where are the success stories right now in Africa, specifically with regard to Bitcoin, not Tether, not just looking for a dollar substitute, but a full embrace of Bitcoin?
Okay, maybe I can start with for Kenya recently, the Kenyan president announced that the Marathon Digital Holdings, I think one of the largest Bitcoin mining companies, will be consulting with the Treasury in terms of regulations and collaboration, preferably with the Ministry of Energy, so as to see what are the requirements for energy that can be able to facilitate Bitcoin mining in Kenya. So I have to maybe mention that Kenya has been navigating through uncertainty when it comes to regulation framework concerning Bitcoin. So Marathon coming in and may be able to offer Kenya probably a chance to develop policies around it and establish licensing protocols. Because operating in terms of a Bitcoin company in the country has been quite a challenge, especially since there's so much uncertainty. And I have to also say this is a huge shift, considering I mentioned some time back that the central bank governor, the former governor, had said that the had actually warned Kenyans against using cryptocurrency, any form of cryptocurrency. He even went to the extent of saying that it's a ludicrous thing, and he should never he should actually be incarcerated if he ever encourages that the country puts Bitcoin in its national reserves. So we are having a shift in that. So that's a good thing. And maybe one thing that also Kenya is really endowed when it comes to surplus geothermal. We already have companies who are mining, for example, like Gridless. So it's going to provide a good source of revenue and energy generation in the country. Maybe another country that I can be able to mention is Ethiopia. That is really abundant when it comes to hydropower. Um, and recently, I think some Ethiopian state company has been able to sign a deal with with a Chinese firm to facilitate Bitcoin mining infrastructure. So with this and with that, there's a massive dam project that's ongoing. That's the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. We'll be able to see Egypt be harness energy almost to the extent of around 60 gigawatts. So I think those are the positive stories maybe I can talk about in terms of adoption recently, because but otherwise, most countries, most people are really just gaining awareness in terms of Bitcoin. Yeah.
The Bitcoin Layer is very proud to be sponsored by River, a Bitcoin only exchange and who we believe to be the leader in the business. Go check them out today at river.com/TBL for a special offer of up to $100 of Bitcoin for free when you go sign up. You have a lot of options when it comes to buying Bitcoin. We believe River is your best choice because they do not custody your Bitcoin on a third-party exchange. They have their own solution for storage, and they encourage you to get your coins off the exchange as soon as possible. River.com/TBL for that special offer. So what we're hearing from Noelyne is that there are there are communities in Africa. We've talked about the Nigerian community, the South African community, very strong Bitcoin communities within the continent, but the adoption from the bigger picture must come from government decisions such as allowing Bitcoin mining projects to flourish within its borders. So when you mentioned this enormous Ethiopian hydroelectric dam, it is being built for obviously power generation for the country, but Bitcoin mining is taking a specific role in the launch of the project itself. And then in your own country of Kenya, we see a pivot away from anti Bitcoin policies to all of a sudden a deal with Marathon. And we will have Fred Thiel on, the CEO of Marathon, in the coming weeks to discuss this issue of joining in with the Kenyan government. So my question is then, in Kenya, what is the power mix that is expected if you have knowledge of that, Noelyne?
Okay, so I believe hydro will be a really good one. Geothermal. So I think hydro and geothermal are majorly the main ones, and I'm looking forward to it. I've mentioned before that we usually have a huge problem when it comes to power outages. So, and power is also quite expensive. I'm really looking forward to seeing the benefits that this may offer, and it's actually a really positive thing that the government is actually really considering even having discussions around it. So in terms of the power mix, as you said, hydro, really good, geothermal, surplus of it. So I guess that those are the main ones in Kenya as compared to maybe Ethiopia, where it's mostly hydro.
And so for people that are in the West, they hear criticisms of Bitcoin mining because of the energy consumption, but what they don't understand is that Bitcoin mining is driving renewable power consumption, and also it's driving more power generation for populations that might not have had access to that power, because then that power can be shared by the people and Bitcoin miners. So, Noelyne, tell people in the West the value of Bitcoin mining to contribute to just raw power generation for a population that does not have steady access to electricity. Just tell us what that means for the people of Kenya and beyond your borders in Africa. You mentioned Gridless. Maybe you could just refresh people's memory on what Gridless is. Tell people, explain to people how important Bitcoin mining is to help the average African just consume electricity when he or she might not have had access to that electricity prior.
Okay, absolutely. That's really great. So, um, we have an abundance of surplus energy. So, maybe for example, what Gridless does, it connects microgrids to this surplus energy. So you'd find communities. I have been fortunate to visit one of their communities in Muranga, where they can now be able to tap into the surplus energy. So when there's not much use, Bitcoin mining can be able to take place, and when the community is in need of access, the Bitcoin miners can be able to shut down, and this way the community can be able to continue using the power. And with this, we have electricity becomes cheaper for the community because they are paying the power distributors in the area where they've been able to connect the power grid. So it's going to be very beneficial, I feel, if we can have this replicated in very many villages in around Africa, because most of these villages are not connected to the main power source, or rather, they are far away from the main power distributors. So, and this is where companies like Gridless comes in. I think it's different in Ethiopia, where already there's the hydropower distributors set up. So, for them, the Bitcoin miners will just be coming in and connecting to that instead. So it's going to be very beneficial. It's going to really change lives in Africa, especially villages in Africa where electricity access is a major problem, especially in most of the rural areas.
Bit, Bitcoin changing lives in Africa. This is why we are covering Bitcoin in Africa with Noelyne Sumba. She comes on the program every few months, doing the work of collecting information from around the continent so that we can have our feet on the ground. For us in the United States, Noelyne, with ETF adoption, huge price swings in the dollar and a constant fixation on the Federal Reserve and what's happening with interest rates, the size of the balance sheet, and global liquidity, it can be easy to forget the human impact of Bitcoin in countries that aren't focused on what the central bank is going to do next week. They're focused on how we can get power consumption for our communities. They're focused on how we can avoid a currency crisis and an absolute collapse in purchasing power, sometimes overnight. So, in your closing thoughts, Noelyne, tell us what we should be looking for now over the next several months in Africa. What are the stories that you're watching? What are you working on to drive Bitcoin adoption?
Okay, so maybe I can mention one unfortunate story. So the Nigerian government also recently set a concerning precedent where they detained two Binance executives for charges of tax evasion and money laundering. So, whereby we saw authorities in Nigeria labeling the Binance-related issues as a matters of national security, and with this, they demanded a removal of naira in Binance. As much as it's an exchange, it's a centralized exchange, it was really serving most people in Nigeria, and I've even had calls from or contacts from people in Nigeria who are now seeking avenues in which they can be able to now access whether it's Bitcoin or USDT. And it's even bad that they're going to the extent of intercepting IFIX and hardware wallets coming into the country. So I feel that the issues between the West and and Africa when it comes to Bitcoin, because for us it's more of like a dire need. We are our currencies are really struggling, and we are looking for avenues. And so maybe even if I can continue on that note, I'm trying to push adoption of Bitcoin in the continent. I recently found myself in a space where I was asked to explain what Bitcoin is, and upon explaining, I described it as freedom money, and I was met to the disturbing comment where somebody told me that suggesting that Bitcoin is freedom money in Africa is a concept of the West, and it just served to show me, because this was an African space, that how much there's a pervasive delusion that we have when it comes to thinking that the continent has ever even experienced, whether it's financial or economic freedom. So we've also seen instances whereby I've been told advocating for property rights or advocating for Austrian economics is a pathway to fascism. So I don't really know, because I'm living in a country where I'm living in a continent where capitalism has never really been allowed to thrive. We've never really embraced fully the benefits of having a free market, or having voluntary exchange, having entrepreneurship, competition, innovation that comes about from it. So um, also around that thought, when you talk about the West, talking about store of value and medium of exchange in Africa, I feel that it's more of an individual preference. We do understand the nature of money as Africans. I don't believe anybody has to maybe lecture us on that. So there's lots of savings group around the continent, and being used as a store of value and a medium of exchange, I believe it's of equal importance just for the for yeah, as we use it as Bitcoin. Maybe on my end, in terms of adoption, right now, Machankura is, because I work with Machankura, maybe if I can, for new audiences, a wallet company that enables sending and receiving of Bitcoin with or without internet connection. And with it, we've been able to get around 15,000 users, and learning new things day by day, learning new ways of trying to teach people how to understand Bitcoin. So maybe what I can say is just a day at a time. At least Bitcoin does not care about all these other issues. The point is just getting Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. So, and yeah, that's the goal.
Absolutely. Noelyne has in the past mentioned that there is a dire need for better currency in Africa that includes dollars and Bitcoin because it's a relative game. And she's also mentioned before and today that Bitcoin is freedom money. And the concept of freedom money might be foreign to people in different parts of the world. Noelyne, we just had a gentleman give a graduation address in front of tens of thousands of people, mentioned Bitcoin, and then was booed by most of the audience. So it doesn't necessarily mean that in Africa, the understanding of money is less or more than in the West. It is a day by day journey, and you are doing amazing work with Machankura with 15,000 users and more coming every day. And it's not just in one country, it's in several countries across the continent. So we're excited to see your continued work. Noelyne Sumba, visiting us from Kenya, our correspondent in Africa. Thank you so much for joining us once again today at the Bitcoin Layer.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick.
The Bitcoin Layer is proud to be sponsored by River. River.com/TBL for that special offer. And the reason that we love River at the Bitcoin Layer is that they put your education first. River.com/learn to understand what Bitcoin is, the fundamentals. Also, how to get your Bitcoin off the exchange into your own custody solution. You can use river.com/learn for all of that information. Go check them out today.